Nicole Montalvo was never one to hold a grudge. In early 2019, she even asked a Florida judge to revoke a protection order against her estranged husband Christopher after he abducted and assaulted her the previous year. Then, she disappeared. Before we begin, we would like to express our deepest sympathies to Nicole's family and friends. Nicole was born in Orlando, Florida on August the 21st of 1986. She was bubbly, caring, and charismatic from the very beginning, and she loved being outside and spending long days at the beach with her family. After high school, she moved out and began working as a waitress. She had an active social life and enjoyed hanging out with friends and watching Monday Night Football, especially when her favorite team, the Philadelphia Eagles, were playing. Nicole was independent and self-sufficient, but she often daydreamed about meeting the perfect man, starting a family, and settling down. She dated her fair share of duds along the way, but she thought she had finally found her perfect match when she met Christopher Otero-Rivera. Nicole and Christopher hit it off immediately, and his parents loved her too. Nicole and Christopher had a lot of great times together, and they eventually got married. But the high point of their relationship was when she gave birth to their son, Elijah. Elijah was the light of their lives, but by then Christopher regularly abused Nicole physically and verbally. In fact, the abuse had been going on for some time, and as is often the case, it got progressively worse over time. The situation was so unbearable by 2018 that Nicole took Elijah and left, but Christopher wasn't about to relinquish his parental rights. The battle for Elijah was stressful and contentious, but the court ended up giving them joint custody. Nicole was okay with the ruling because she wanted Christopher to be involved in Elijah's life. On the other hand, she knew he wanted sole custody so he could get her out of his life once and for all. Later that year, Christopher asked Nicole to meet him to discuss the situation. But instead, he kidnapped her, stuck a rag in her mouth, and took her to a remote area. After dragging her out of the car, he threw her on the ground and punched, slapped, and choked her. Christopher finally released his grip just before Nicole lost consciousness, but she claimed he threatened to kill her if she reported the attack. Before leaving, he took a number of Nicole's personal items, including her bank card. Later, he used it to buy gas and withdraw money from an ATM. Despite the threat, Nicole's mother called 911 and reported the incident later that night.
911, where's your emergency? It says, do you need police or medical? I don't know. My daughter's friend just called and said that her husband beat the shit out of her. I'm at my house. I'm on my way over there right now. So 4700 Citrus is the actual address they need to go to, correct?
Yes.
Do you know if anybody had any weapons?
I have no idea. I just got the phone call and I'm leaving now, but I want the cops called.
I understand. I'm getting the call in to get somebody headed out that way. Do you know if she needs an ambulance?
I don't know. She just wants me to come pick her up.
When officers arrived at her apartment, Nicole was visibly shaken and traumatized. Her face was bruised and swollen. There were leaves and other debris in her hair, and she still had traces of blood around her mouth and nose. Christopher was arrested and charged with kidnapping, battery, and aggravated assault. His new girlfriend, Toni Marie Rocker, was also arrested and charged because she was with him at the time. However, she was eventually cleared of any wrongdoing. Christopher laid out his version of events during a lengthy interview at the police station.
So we'll kind of just start all over again, just to kind of get a general understanding. Can you kind of explain to me how you start off your day today?
I got up and got ready for work and went to work.
Okay, what time do you go to work?
I get there at 8.
8 a.m.?
Yes.
Okay, and what do you do for work?
Lawn care.
Lawn care. And where's that at? Like what area?
In Orlando.
Orlando. Okay. And you work for a company or you own your own company or what?
For a company, yeah. Well, I mean, it's a privately owned company, but yeah.
Okay. And you were at work from 8 to what?
8 to about 4-ish, 4.
Okay, and you got off work.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then after that, what'd you do?
I went home.
Okay, and that's the address at
Yes.
room 132B?
Yes.
Okay. And once you were home, what did you do after that?
After that, I mean, I showered and changed, hung out for a while. Ended up going out to the lakefront, clear my head, try and get all this jumbled up mess together, pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
That's life.
Mm-hmm. What time did you go to the lakefront? Approximately.
I don't know. It was still daylight. I didn't pay attention at the time. It was probably I don't know, maybe 7:30.
7:30 p.m.
Yes.
Okay. And then once you went to the lakefront, what did you do when you were done with the lakefront?
When I was done with lakefront, I came home. Well, when I was done with lakefront, I was on my way home. That was when I was talking with Nicole. She was telling me what was going on. Well, we were kind of arguing a little and then hanging up on each other, and whoever got hung up on ended up calling back, or I mean, she mostly called me, but she told me about what happened. So I met up with her, and she followed me back to the motel, and that's where we talked for a little while. And I explained to her that she needs to go to the hospital. She needs to, talk to her parents and have one of them watch a lot. The other one take you to the hospital so you can get checked out. What happened? She told me that she had her money stolen, and after that, then she ended up leaving and going home.
Investigators never believed his story, but he decided to plead guilty after the charges were reduced to simple battery and unlawful possession of a bank card. While Christopher was incarcerated, he offered to have his father pay his cellmate's $500 bond if he would help frame Nicole to make her look like an unfit mother when he got out. All the man had to do was plant drugs in her car. Then Christopher would have someone call an anonymous tip. If the drugs were found in Nicole's car and she was convicted of possession, Christopher and his parents would have a good chance of getting sole custody of Elijah on the grounds that she was an addict. Christopher called his father from jail on multiple occasions while he was planning this scheme. During the calls, Christopher spoke in vague language because he knew the calls would be monitored and recorded.
Hello?
Yeah, who's this?
Hey, it's me.
Yeah, what's going on, man?
Listen, I need you to do me a favor.
What's that?
Okay, there's somebody that's going to help me out with what's going on. Okay?
Okay.
But they got to be bonded out. There's somebody else that's going to sign for them. They just don't have the money. Okay? And it's through a bond, and the 10% is $500. I'm trying to, see if maybe, you'd be willing to help me out with that. And, I'll have, who's going to sign, call you. They're supposed to be, getting out soon. And, they're gonna sign for, the person that's going to help me out. It's just that they don't have the money. And, I figured if you could, then, I guess, I don't know, the only thing I have to offer is probably the Eclipse, pull it out.
The Eclipse thing, yeah, man, that thing junk. That thing, we had to send it to the junkyard to be able to get money for your commissary and for the cars and all that stuff.
Okay. Because I know you're trying to do, whatever you can to, discredit and try and, do what you can.
He told his father that his cellmate was going to help them discredit someone. He never said who he wanted to discredit, but in hindsight, he was obviously talking about his estranged wife, Nicole. Christopher asked his father if he could come up with $500. He said he could, and later Christopher gave his cellmate important information, including what Nicole looked like, where she lived and worked, and what kind of car she drove. The man never planted the drugs in her car like he said he would, but he eventually told investigators that Christopher's father, Angel, was in on the plan, and that he even offered to pay him to make Nicole disappear. With credit for time served, Christopher spent just 8 months in prison. As part of his probation, he had to wear a monitoring device around his ankle when he was released. He was also prohibited from having any contact with Nicole, but he could communicate with her through a court-approved app that allowed them to make arrangements to pick up and drop off Elijah. Nicole was happy to be out of the abusive relationship, and with a new job and a wonderful son, things were going great. She didn't know about the ill-fated scheme Christopher masterminded from prison, but she told a friend that he tried to hack one of her social media accounts to steal a naked photograph that he could use to prove to the court that she was an unfit mother. Nicole also told her friend that Christopher and his father Angel wanted sole custody of Elijah, and almost prophetically that she thought they would do anything to get it. Nicole filed for divorce in early February of 2019. There was still plenty of tension between her and Christopher, but things generally went smoothly when they exchanged custody of their son, Elijah. On Monday, October the 21st, 2019, she dropped Elijah off at the Rivera residence on Hickson Avenue in St. Cloud, where Christopher lived with his parents. It wasn't anything she hadn't done countless times before without incident, but that day something went horribly wrong. Nicole was supposed to pick up Elijah at Harmony Community School the following afternoon, but she never showed up. It wasn't like her to flake out, especially when it came to her son, which was her number one priority. It was also suspicious that she didn't answer her phone when a school administrator called to find out where she was. Christopher's father, Angel, eventually picked Elijah up from school, but later that night, Nicole's friends and family members reported her missing because nobody had seen or heard from her in hours. They hoped it was just a routine problem like a flat tire, a last-minute work issue, or a lost cell phone, but they couldn't help but wonder if Christopher's notoriously violent temper had finally boiled over past the point of no return. Due to Christopher's history of abuse, he was a person of interest from the very start. There was still no proof that a crime had been committed, but it definitely seemed like a bad sign when Nicole's Honda Accord was found on the side of a road shortly after she disappeared. When investigators questioned Christopher and his parents, they claimed that Nicole left immediately after dropping Elijah off. Christopher's father also said that Nicole sent him a text asking him to pick up Elijah from school. The text was very apologetic and asked if he and his wife Wanda would watch Elijah for a few days while she got things figured out. "I'm really sorry about everything. I should have listened to you. I made a bad mistake. I need you and Wanda to take care of my son for a few days until I get things figured out. I am with a friend that is going to help me through this. Tell him Mommy loves him." Investigators did find a text from Nicole's number on Angel's phone, but they didn't believe she sent it. When they subpoenaed Nicole's phone records, GPS data showed that her mobile phone was on the Rivera property after Christopher's family claimed she left, and that it eventually lost power, got turned off, or was destroyed. The question was, if Nicole really did drive from the Rivera property after dropping Elijah off, why didn't she take her phone with her? There were still lots of unanswered questions, but investigators were beginning to piece together a hazy image of what happened that day. Later, one of the Rivera's neighbors told them that he saw a large excavator digging on the property that very afternoon. The neighbor couldn't put his finger on his feelings towards the family, but he told investigators that he always tried to avoid contact with them because he had an uneasy feeling about them. Another bombshell came when Christopher's brother, Nicholas, told investigators that he saw Christopher and their father in the garage standing over Nicole's lifeless and bloody body. The next day, more than a dozen investigators, sheriff's deputies, and forensic experts began searching the property with cadaver dogs. They even used a pump to drain a nearby pond. They didn't find anything in the mud at the bottom of the pond, but they were curious about a freshly dug hole on a remote portion of the property. On Friday, the 25th of October, 4 days after Nicole was reported missing, Osceola County investigator Emily Sita followed a set of fresh tire tracks to an old trailer that was partially obscured by leaves, twigs, and other debris. As she approached, she immediately felt hordes of flies and a pungent odor. Then, after clearing away some of the debris, she found what appeared to be human flesh. And shortly thereafter, they found a hoop earring just like the ones Nicole was known to wear. Later, more remains were found on the Hickson Avenue property as well as on another property in Osceola County that was also owned by the Riveras. The unidentified material was sent to a laboratory in Deerfield Beach and compared to samples taken from Nicole's parents. By then, investigators weren't surprised that the DNA matched, or that GPS data from Christopher's ankle monitor showed he was moving around the area where the remains were found immediately after Nicole went missing. They theorized that he killed Nicole because he wanted sole custody of their son, and that he dismembered and burned the body and used the excavator his father rented to bury her remains. Investigators also suspected Otero-Rivera may have been involved in the murder, or at the very least he helped to dispose of the body and cover up the crime after the fact. Shortly after the grisly discovery, Osceola County Sheriff Russ Gibson held a somber press conference during which he released new information to the media and the general public. He said the crime scene was the most gruesome he had seen in his more than 3 decades in law enforcement. Unsurprisingly, the medical examiner was unable to determine how Nicole was killed because her body was thoroughly dismembered and burned. However, she found a knife and saw marks on the bone fragments and others that looked like they had been fed through a wood chipper. In the end, the cause of death was listed as homicidal violence of unspecified means. 31-year-old Christopher and his 61-year-old father Angel were arrested, charged with second-degree murder, and booked into the Osceola County Jail in late October 2019. Christopher's mother and Angel's wife, Wanda, was also arrested and charged with giving false statements and tampering with evidence, but she posted bail and the charges against her were eventually dropped. With his mother dead and his father and paternal grandparents implicated in her death, Nicole's parents got custody of Elijah. They described him as an incredible boy, and considering what he had been through, he held it together about as well as could be expected. Prosecutors thought they had a relatively solid case against Christopher and Angel, but State Attorney Adamas Ayala wasn't so sure. She openly criticized Sheriff Russ Gibson for arresting the defendants prematurely. She didn't think the prosecution had enough evidence to convict them. By then, the case had become a media sensation, and at one point it even looked like Christopher and Angel would be released because a key indictment deadline had been missed. Thankfully, the issue was resolved and the pair remained in custody. Christopher and Angel hired different attorneys and entered not guilty pleas, and shortly after being detained, they began blaming one another for the heinous crime. Angel was taken to the hospital after claiming he was having chest pains and trouble breathing. But when he was back in jail, he sent his wife Wanda a letter that was intercepted by investigators. It said that he was sure someone helped Christopher kill Nicole and dispose of the body, but that he had no idea who it was or who would even be capable of committing such an atrocity. The letter also stated that Christopher would have to do some time in prison. Investigators suspected that Angel knew they would read the letter and that he only sent it to deflect blame away from his role in the crime and place it squarely on the shoulders of his son. The trial in the murder of Nicole Montalvo got underway in the spring of 2021. Approximately 18 months had elapsed since the high-profile crime was committed, and Christopher and Angel's futures hung in the balance. There was no denying that Nicole's mutilated and charred remains were found on 2 properties owned by the Rivera family, but according to Christopher's attorney, it did not prove that he killed her. His attorney also claimed that the evidence against his client was entirely circumstantial, that Angel Rivera ruled the family with an iron fist, and that he was the one who orchestrated the murder. He also raised doubt about the prosecution's version of events by suggesting that Nicole may have been killed somewhere else and then buried on the Rivera's property. According to him, this was plausible because very little blood was actually found at the scene or in the garage where Nicholas claimed to have seen Nicole's body. Meanwhile, the prosecution argued that Christopher and his father were obsessed with getting sole custody of Elijah. During opening statements, prosecutors told the judge, the jury, and Nicole's heartbroken family and friends that Christopher attacked, murdered, dismembered, burned, and buried her body, all while their son Elijah was in the house with his grandmother just a stone's throw away. To paint a clearer picture of the nature of Nicole and Christopher's relationship, the prosecution called her mother to the stand. During the testimony, she described the condition Nicole was in the night Christopher abducted and assaulted her in 2018. Next, the crime scene technician who found Nicole's remains provided grislier and more damning testimony by describing the process of sifting through the dirt looking for remains and bone fragments amidst a bevy of flies and the pungent odor of decomposing flesh.
They were taking out sections of dirt, I guess it was more like mud, and then I was going through those sections to try to find small pieces of bone or tissue.
Right? And did you sift just one day, that Sunday, or for multiple days at the Henry J property?
For multiple days.
Do you know how many days you worked at that property on Henry J?
3 different days.
Were you asked at some point on Tuesday, October 29th, to undertake yet a different task?
I was.
And what were you asked to do?
I was asked to execute a search warrant on Christopher Otero-Rivera and Angel Rivera.
So I'd like to start with Christopher Otero-Rivera. Did you in fact go and obtain a buccal swab from Christopher Otero-Rivera?
I did.
And when and where did this happen?
This was at the Osceola County Corrections Department at approximately 1 o'clock on that Tuesday.
How did you confirm his identity?
The corrections officers took me to him. He was not wearing identification.
Okay. Did you take a photograph of Mr. Christopher Otero-Rivera to document who you were taking a swab of?
I did.
And may I approach the witness to what's been marked as State's Exhibits D and E?
Yes.
Ms. Balcom, I'm going to show you State's Exhibit D. Do you recognize that?
I do.
And what do you recognize it to be?
It is a picture of Christopher Otero-Rivera, the person I took the buccal swab from.
All right, and is that a fair and accurate depiction of the person you took the buccal swab from that afternoon?
It is.
And I'm going to trade you now and ask you to look at State's Exhibit E. Do you recognize State's E?
I do.
And how do you recognize it?
I recognize it by my handwriting and my initials on the seal.
And what do you recognize State's Exhibit, D to be?
It is the buccal swab that I collected from Christopher Otero-Rivera.
And I misspoke, that's State's Exhibit E. So that's the buccal swab that you took from the person in the photograph?
That is correct.
Okay. Your Honor, at this time, I'd ask the court to admit State's Exhibits D and E, State's Exhibits 4 and 5. No objection.
Later, the medical examiner who performed the autopsy testified that she only received about half of Nicole's remains and that she had never seen a victim who had been manually dismembered with saws and knives. This was perhaps the most poignant testimony of all, because those present couldn't help but conjure the image of the defendants engaged in the horrific task of cutting up the body with tools and kitchen knives. Even so, the trial was disrupted when prosecutors asked the judge to dismiss a juror who reportedly nodded off during important testimony. Neither Christopher nor his father took the stand during the trial, but Wanda Rivera did. She testified that she was on good terms with Nicole and that they regularly exchanged friendly text messages. Christopher's brother and Angel's son, Nicholas, also testified. He confirmed that Angel was the undisputed and tyrannical head of the family. However, his courtroom testimony was far less damning than what he had told investigators shortly after Nicole disappeared. To some of those present in the courtroom, it appeared as though he was intimidated by his father. During closing arguments, prosecutor Ryan Williams stated that the evidence clearly showed that Christopher and Angel were guilty of murdering Nicole and disposing of her body, and that nobody else had the opportunity or motive to commit the crime. He also painted an accurate picture of Nicole and Christopher's troubled relationship and laid out the troubling series of events that led up to her horrible death. On the other hand, the defense could only raise doubt about where the crime was committed and remind the judge, jury, and spectators that much of the evidence was circumstantial. At the end of the 2-week trial, the jury adjourned to deliberate. Nearly everyone agreed that the state presented a strong case, but nobody knew if the jury would deliberate for a day or a month, or whether they would return with a guilty or not guilty verdict. Surprisingly, they only needed 90 minutes to reach a decision, after which they solemnly entered the courtroom to reveal the two men's fates. They found both Christopher and Angel guilty of second-degree murder, abusing a human body, and tampering with evidence. Afterward, prosecutor Ryan Williams commended Nicole's family for showing such dignity and self-control through the disturbing trial. Prosecutor Williams asked the judge to give both defendants life sentences without the possibility of parole. As he put it, if there were ever two men who deserved to spend the rest of their lives in prison for committing a dastardly crime, it was Christopher and Angel Otero-Rivera. Before sentencing, 3 of Nicole's family members were given the opportunity to read pre-prepared victim impact statements. Nicole's sister, Christina, said the grieving process was ongoing and that it may never end. She also said that whenever anyone asked what happened to Nicole, she only says that she was the victim of domestic violence because it was just too painful to say that she was murdered by her estranged husband and the father of her child. When it was his turn to read his statement, Nicole's brother Stephen said it was impossible to describe the terror and sense of loss that he felt. Next, Nicole's other brother, Edward, stated how he, other family members, and many of her friends begged her to leave Christopher on multiple occasions. Edward also said that he recalled hearing his mother crying many nights because she was worried that Christopher would hurt her, or perhaps even worse. In the end, Christopher and Angel Otero-Rivera were both sentenced to life in prison for second-degree murder. In addition, they had 20 years added to their sentences for abusing a dead body and tampering with physical evidence. Angel Rivera died from COVID-19 2 months after being sentenced, and in all likelihood, Christopher will die in prison as well. If you found this story compelling, don't forget to like the video, comment down below your take on it, and please subscribe to the channel. Also, hit the notification bell in order to stay up to date each time we reveal a new shocking case. Until next time, stay safe and keep your eyes peeled. You never know what's lurking in the shadows.